Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Dun & Bradstreet's webinar, 5 Hurdles to Overcome on Your Master Data Journey. During today's presentation, we will invite you to submit any questions you might have using the Q&A box. Our webinar is scheduled to run for 45 minutes, and we will have time at the end to take your questions. A recorded version of this webinar will be available at the same location where you registered. We are very, very excited today to have George and Cecilia from our Data Advisory Services team here with us today. George and Cecilia, welcome. Before we dive into today's webinar, do you guys mind sharing a little bit more about yourselves? George and Cecilia? I'll hand it over to you guys.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're very excited to be here today and to be able to share this with you. A little bit about myself. I've been in the data industry for more than 2 decades and worked with a lot of different and interesting clients on some projects that have largely been centered around improving customer experience and improving around marketing and sales efforts. My focus has largely been on data engineering, data modeling, and data management and governance, although I've had the opportunity to really have my fingers in a lot of different parts of the data environment. Cecilia?
Thanks, George. Hi, Nicole. Hi, everyone. My name is Cecilia Petit. I'm also a principal consultant on the data advisory team. Before joining, I was a customer, and I used Dnb data in demand propensity models, supply chain management, territory planning, and other use cases that required some mastering of customer and to a lesser extent also vendor data. And now that I've transitioned to helping clients in other verticals, I'm finding that the needs and the challenges that come with them are actually pretty consistent across most of the use cases that we support. Thanks, Nicole. So here are the 5 biggest hurdles that we've seen get in the way of master data efforts. Excuse me, George and I were just talking about allergies. The first is thinking that it's all about the tools, losing focus of the true business goals, getting lost in the perfect data rabbit hole, fixating a little too much on the golden record, and this one definitely not exclusive to master data, trying to boil the ocean. So these are the 5 main topics, and George will get us started with hurdle number 1.
Thanks, Cecilia. And when we think about this in terms of hurdles, we think about a lot of athletic competition, and it got us thinking about how we might talk about this. And we thought a lot about racing and stuff like that. And in order to do well in any sort of athletic competition, including marathons or hurdling, you need to make sure that you're fueled up properly. And I think all of us agree that data is increasingly becoming the fuel that organizations rely on in order to make smart decisions. Now, some people get a little bit off track, and they'll buy all the newest gear. They'll go out, they'll get the latest things, the neatest things, and they'll gear up and expect that that's going to help them really succeed in the race. Well, that's not the most important thing. What they need is that fuel. Without it, you might have a great looking system. You might have all the latest stuff, but you're not going to be able to get what you need to get done. Smart runners recognize what the right things are that they need to address. They need to make sure that they're hydrated, they have the right food, the right fuel, that they've gotten enough sleep, that they're properly prepared, and they're going to take care of those. Similarly, data organizations need to focus on data first. The latest tools and software are going to be helpful, but not if you're not focused on the right data. So we encourage organizations essentially to be that smart athlete, that smart runner. Make sure that the data that you have is correct, it's topical, it's clean, that you've mapped it properly. And also importantly, that it's relatively recent. If you don't have that, then no matter how good, how modern your tool set is, you're going to have a challenge really successfully delivering on your master data promises.
Thanks, George. The second hurdle we've seen get in the way is losing focus or perspective. And since we're going with this running metaphor, I thought I'd share a story about my first 5K ever. I was talking with another runner and I mentioned that it was my first race. So she said, "Oh, let me give you some advice. You see, I like to set my expectations really low." At this point, I've got two thoughts running in my mind. One is, well, that doesn't sound like my kind of advice. But the other is that what she doesn't know is that all I was hoping to accomplish was to run the full distance without a walking break. So there might be some relevance there. So I listened. Here's what she said. She said, "Number one, don't die." I don't know about you, but that is not what I expected her to say. And I was so surprised I wasn't really sure whether I should laugh. So I did what I learned from middle school foreign exchange programs. I smiled and nodded. So then she said, "Number two, don't end up in the medical tent." I didn't even know about the medical tent. So I might have been a little bit worried at that point. And number three, do finish the race. Now, the advice might have sounded like a little bit of a joke, but when we think about it, it's actually a good example of keeping a sense of perspective. Because just as the race isn't the end goal for 5K runners, or at least for most of us, the master data program isn't the end goal for most businesses. So what were those original business goals that led the organization to embark on the master data journey in the first place? If those aren't clear, we need to find an organizational champion, and we have to make sure that that person is in the business. And it's their use cases that we need to understand and document. What is it that we want to be able to accomplish as a result of mastering our data? And how will we measure success? And here we're not looking for a number of records brought together under a single platform or a number of duplicates removed, but what is the business actually trying to accomplish? So chances are this is going to look like a cost savings or a growth target in terms of dollars of revenue or profit, or a combination of both. The next point on here is about having a plan in place. I realize that the single bullet doesn't do this topic justice, but here we just want to share one habit that can be useful. And it's this notion of pretending that the user is in the room. This is similar to the way that customer experience professionals use the customers in the room mindset, and they themselves borrowed it from healthcare companies who sometimes literally put a chair labeled with the word patient in every conference room. And that's meant to serve as a reminder to always do what's best for the patient. Of course, we hope that that's what they're doing all along, but it can help clarify some of the more complex decisions. And in the master data world, we're lucky that it's actually possible. Not always easy, but it's possible to get the end users in the room because they're usually part of the same organization. So we have to at least try to bring them in, even if it has to be a Zoom room these days. Finally, it's not enough for the project manager and the leadership team to know the business goal and the use cases and the performance metrics. We have to make sure that everyone on the team knows what these are and how their work impacts them. So there are a lot of different ways to do this, but just to share a couple examples, I've seen teams put dashboards and success stories on monitors or internet landing pages, or even in email newsletters. Again, the goal is to make sure that everyone knows what the true business goals are and how we're performing against them.
So we've got a pop quiz here, and I'm thinking now that maybe we should have included like a moment for people to answer this, and we could have offered a Starbucks gift card or something like that, but I don't have one, so we're not going to do that. If we think about a 10 million row data table and it's 99.9% perfect, that is, only 1 out of every 1,000 records has any sort of defect, right? And marketing team says to me, "Okay, George, go pull 1,000 records from that table at random and hand them to me." What's the likelihood that that table is going to include a defective record, at least one defective record? Well, if we reveal the answer, it's 63%, which seems a lot higher than most people would expect, because you've got this 99.9% perfect table, but if we reveal the formula that goes in behind it, we see that over time, no matter how good your data is, the more records that you're pulling from it, the higher the chance that you're going to get a defect of some kind in that output. And I think that this is important because we focus a lot in our industry on how much error our data has and what the quality of our data is. And we're always kind of chasing perfection. And so if we look ahead to the next slide, we can see that this often ends up being a hurdle for a lot of companies. The data is really critical. As we talked about before, it's really the fuel that is getting you through this race, that's allowing you to compete. But if you've got unreasonable expectations of perfection, that's going to stand in the way of actually being able to take action on your data and do something with it. A way to think about this is most of my friends, when they're running races, when they're competing in athletic contests of some sort, they're out to win if they can. But a lot of them look at it as an opportunity just to improve on their personal bests. They want to do better than they did in the last 5K or the last 10K or the last marathon they ran. And so that's what they focus on. It's just that incremental, iterative improvement for themselves. And we need to think about that in the same way when we're looking at data and we're looking at master data. We can't wait to be perfect. We can't wait to feel like we've achieved our final goal with our data quality before we get started in terms of using it. Because the fact is that the data is never going to be absolutely perfect. Your systems for processing it are never going to be absolutely perfect. And the processes that you want to apply to it are never going to be perfect either. The costs of trying to chase that last bit of perfection, really quickly they start to catch up with you and they start to outweigh what benefit you could actually gain from them. And so certainly we want to always be on the lookout for opportunities to improve data. We don't want to just be laissez-faire about it and let errors into the data without trying to address them. But we need to be thoughtful about how we do this so that we're not spending more time, more money, more resources trying to chase that last hundredths of a percent of quality when we could be focusing those efforts somewhere else and getting more value out of them. So you do need a plan for keeping your data and your systems and the processes up to date. But it's really important, again, to come up with a prioritization for them and follow that prioritization. Reevaluate them every once in a while so that you can make sure that they're staying in sync with your business goals, and always evaluate the cost of trying to get that next bit of quality out of your data against what benefit you might gain from it. If you do that, then this is a hurdle that hopefully you can overcome.
Great points. Along the same lines, I think it's also perfectionist tendencies that can lead to our fourth hurdle, trying to build the perfect golden record. I should start by saying that the golden record itself isn't the problem. In fact, it's a reasonable, more than that, it's a useful component of a data master. But where we see it get in the way is when teams expect I'll be able to identify a single golden or perfect name, a single perfect address, a perfect phone number, and so on. And the reason it becomes unmanageable is that every stakeholder group has a different version of some of these core elements for each record. So finance will think it should be the build to information, operations think it should be the ship to, data strategy consultant think it's whoever asked the most challenging questions, except we know we're right. And naturally, each of these groups believe that their version is that single best version of the truth. And of course, that implies that the other versions are incorrect, which causes some tension. But the truth is that all these versions are valid. And more importantly, they all have value, so they all need to be represented. So we encourage our clients to embrace the multifaceted golden record. Yes, we made that up, but the reason we did is that we think it's a useful construct because different angles present a different view of the same object. So in practice, that means we have to allow the golden record to either have multiple fields to contain these duplicated or seemingly duplicated values, or we have to have an easy way to link tables that capture the different versions or views of the truth so that the right version can be used in the right context.
Thanks, Cecilia. And finally, the fifth of our big hurdles that we tend to see most often is this idea of boiling the ocean. The idea of boiling the ocean isn't something that is limited to the data industry. It happens in every industry and in every aspect of technology and anywhere else that you look. And what we try to encourage our customers to do is to think about what is most important to them. Again, prioritization, and to focus on that and to achieve success iteratively in maybe sometimes small chunks that really brings them closer to their business goals. As this says here, you're not going to run 26 miles all at once. You're only going to achieve that goal by going one step at a time. And I'm not a runner myself. I don't have the patience for it, but I've got plenty of friends who are. And one of the things that they tell me is that they're always setting and establishing milestones for themselves, particularly when the race is getting difficult. They're going to say, I'm just going to focus on the next mile or the next half mile. I'm going to focus on the next block. Or I see that telephone pole or that stop sign up ahead of me, and I'm going to get there. And once they get there, they give themselves a moment of congratulations and figure out what their next milestone is. And by doing that, by focusing on just little parts of the race at a time, they're able to get through the entire thing. And so there's this misconception that I think is only just now beginning to break in the industry, that with data, it needs to be done all at the same time. But it really can be done iteratively. You can establish milestones. You can establish what the next subject area of data is that you're going to focus on. You can determine that you've got some primary group of customers for which you really want to focus on data quality and getting the data governed and mastered. You can focus on the next legacy system that you want to address and perhaps integrate into your overall MDM solution. So by incrementally implementing these priority portions of your solution, you can achieve a couple of different things. First, if you specify what you want done in a narrow fashion, your development team is going to find it easier to focus on that work and to achieve it in a timely fashion. Also, it gives the opportunity to bring what you've done to stakeholders and demonstrate to them that it is achievable and that it's bringing value to the organization. And that's often going to encourage them to continue to invest in the efforts. And also it allows you to occasionally, periodically look back at what you've done, figure out what's gone well, what's gone poorly, what might need to adjust. It allows you to reassess, make sure that your priorities are still in order. And eventually you're going to run all those 26 miles. You just can't do them all at once.
Thank you. So these were our top 5 hurdles. And we'll cover just 5 more that didn't quite make the top 5, but we still felt more important to mention. So first we have allowing data to get old and stale. I think we all use this saying, change is the only constant. This definitely applies to business data because the world changes and businesses change. And to give you a sense for how much change in Dun & Bradstreet's own data cloud, each year we see 4% of businesses change locations, 2% change their name, and 5% change their phone number. That might not sound like a lot, but remember the pop quiz? If instead of a 0.1% defect rate, we now have a 2% defect rate, that likelihood of drawing a flawed record from the 1,000 random sample is now 99.99999%. That's 8 nines. I had to count them on my fingers. I probably shouldn't have shared that. So we need to have a plan in place to refresh the data periodically to avoid having a bad user experience. Next is forgetting to cover the basics. It can feel tedious, but it saves a lot of time and frustration down the road if we take care early on of deciding how to structure the data and handle field mapping and building data dictionaries. One of the basic questions, like who is the customer, is not easy to answer early on, but it's much more challenging when systems are already in place and we've already started down the road. The third point here is trying to do everything without an external view of the world, meaning using first-party data only. Obviously, most Dnb customers value third-party data, but we still see pockets within large client organizations. I see it in some of my banking clients, for example. And I understand that's tempting when we already have massive amounts of internal data to just think we have enough. But I encourage anyone, and they usually take me up on it, to at least test the lift of bringing in another lens through an external source. Then we have treating data as a cost center rather than as an asset. This one can be a real challenge, and it's not easy to solve for because you have to change people's perceptions. So some of the approaches that we recommend in the focus hurdle can really help here, particularly working closely with a business, because that makes it easier to make sure that everything that we do is geared toward helping them succeed. And if we do that right and combine it with some of the bite-size short-term goal setting that George mentioned, it becomes easier to tie hard results to the investment. And actually, I should mention, we do have a tool. It's an ROI calculator centered around the cost of bad data that can help with that. So it's freely available, and your Dnb teams can help you with that. And the final runner-up is trying to do it all yourself when good referential data exists. The basic idea with this one is to simplify the process of mastering data by matching to a unique key and then using that to connect records. The other benefit of leveraging somebody like Dun & Bradstreet, that was a completely random example, is that you'll be able to lean on their SMEs for guidance and support, which brings us to our next slide.
Great transition, Cecilia.
I know.
We are here to help. Both Cecilia and I are proudly part of Dun & Bradstreet's data advisory services team, and a good-looking bunch we are. You can see all of us there. There's nearly 30 data experts on the team, including data advisors, data strategists, principal consultants like Cecilia and myself. The average tenure among this group is more than a decade of data consulting experience. So this is a team full of individuals who are able to help. They've been through a lot. They've seen a lot of things. They've helped thousands of customers. Many have been practitioners themselves in previous lives. You can see here industry specializations around technology and telecom, RTM, finance, banking, and insurance. And really, the level of support that this team can provide extends from the very highest level to the very lowest levels. And we're happy and excited to work with clients to help them get a better handle on what their data management, their enterprise data management, master data experiences are going to be. And so we encourage you to reach out to these data experts, including Cecilia and myself, with any questions, with any concerns, and we're happy to look for ways that Dun & Bradstreet can help you be successful with your master data management efforts.
Great. Thanks so much, George and Cecilia. That was really a great session. I sure learned, some great best practices on how our customers can overcome the challenges that they're facing, to master their data. So again, thank you to our speakers today. So you guys might be wondering, okay, this is great, but how can I get started? Well, a really great next step would be to understand the state of your data. We have a free tool called Dnb IQ, and it helps you do just that, really understand the current state of your data, helps you understand, how your customer data has changed over time, understand, where your major revenue generators are coming from across your customer portfolio, and really understand where there's greater room for opportunity across your customer data. So I encourage everyone who hasn't yet done so, to really take a look at our Dnb IQ tool. And the best way to go about that is to contact your account rep. And if you don't know who your account rep is specifically, this link can actually guide you on just filling out a contact form, and someone will contact you from DNB within like 24 hours. There might be some of you on today's call that actually have done that, right? Do understand the current state of their data, and now they want to do more with it. They want to improve it, right? Curate their data for their business need. And we have a self-service tool that allows you to do just that as well. It's called Dnb Connect. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but we have a free trial if you guys would like to access it and understand a little bit more about Dnb Connect. And in the follow-up email that we will be doing after this webinar, we will provide you with a direct link on the Dnb Connect brochure, so you can learn a little bit more about the product as well as the trial. Or if you would just like to specifically go to the source, you can contact Cecilia or George here. Their emails are listed, and you can contact them simply by reviewing the recording that is accessible on the registration page. So with that said, I will now move on to Q&A. All right, let's take some questions from our audience. And as a reminder, if you guys haven't done so already, you can submit your questions in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, so first question. In your opinion, what is the first crucial step to begin mastering my data? George, you want to take that one?
Sure. I think we touched on it a little bit during the presentation, but the first thing is really understanding, what are your business goals? What are you trying to achieve from the work that you're about to undertake? As I think Cecilia mentioned, a master data management effort, a master data lake, whatever you want to call it, in and of itself isn't a business goal. It's a step, it's a tool on the way to achieving some business goal. And I think we really need to identify, what are you trying to achieve as a business that you think master data efforts are going to help you with? Is it better marketing efforts? Is it better customer retention? Are you trying to understand risk level among your supplier base better? Understanding what you're trying to achieve is really going to be critically important. If you try and get to the step of building processes, building out product, building priorities before you really understand that goal, I think you're putting the cart before the horse in a lot of ways. So that's what I would say. Cecilia, do you have a different thought on that?
I'm really glad you went with that. I know it's my soapbox, but it always has to start with the use case. What is it we're trying to accomplish? Then we could talk about some of the next steps after that. But if there's one critical first step, that's the one.
Yep. Keeping it simple and just understanding what the goal is, right? First. Okay, great. Next question. For a small to medium-sized business with minimal resources, how can DNB help my organization make sense of my data? So Cecilia, you want to take that one?
I can take that one. So making sense of the data, I think that means understanding what's there and how workable it might be. So we have data and tools that can help with that, where you can learn quite a bit by running what we call match and append. So attempting to match that file to DNB's data teaches you an awful lot about the current data quality. It can also help you fill some gaps. So if you have gaps in the core elements, or if you want to supplement it with additional elements that would help you work with that data better. It could be hierarchies, it could be other fields that could come in handy for prioritization, but the matching step is always first. So I would say that would be the first step.
Okay. So is there a price minimum for utilizing the data advisory team?
So great question. I think that's something that some companies may get a little bit worried about, right? I mean, advice and consultation often is expensive. One of the things that we're focused on in our team is trying to find ways for customers to take advantage of the knowledge that Dun & Bradstreet has, not just the data, but also the services that Cecilia's and my team is able to offer by bundling some of that stuff together into what we call service blocks. And there are service blocks that we offer that really range from not all that expensive and would allow companies to start getting an idea of what's the quality of their data, where can they focus on improving it, how might they be able to improve their match, and focus again. Cecilia just talked about that being really kind of the entry point for a lot of small or medium businesses. And we're focusing these service blocks on trying to help those points. And in our mind, they're affordable, and they're really good ways to initiate that conversation with Dun & Bradstreet, find out what you need, and continue from there.
So I think the answer is you guys can reach out directly to Cecilia or George. Okay. Okay. Next question. Does Dnb have any self-service tools to help companies master their data? I mean, I kind of alluded to this already with Dnb Connect, but Cecilia or George, you want to dive in a little bit deeper?
I think Connect is the first one that comes to mind with this question. So Connect just launched last year, and it's built exactly for that purpose. It's designed to let the user match and enrich their data and then monitor changes in this self-service tool. So perfect there. We have a couple other things that can be self-serve, but not as crucial to the business processes as Connect. Anything else, George?
I think you hit it. I mean, Dnb Connect is something that we're all really excited about. I'd encourage that as maybe a first stop for anyone who's looking for a self-service opportunity to engage with Dun & Bradstreet.
Okay, great. Next question. What do you mean by a cost center? Is that to justify the cost of data management and analytics?
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency a lot of the time to think about data as an expense rather than really as an asset. And that, I think, is the distinction that we're trying to draw here, is that you don't want to look at data in most cases as somewhere where you're spending money. You're spending money to acquire, to manipulate, or to process data. You rather should be thinking about it as an investment in an asset. And that asset is going to pay dividends, just like stocks or bonds or whatever you're investing in your 401k might. And so instead of thinking of it as somewhere where you're putting money and you're never going to see it again, which is what we think of as a cost center, instead evaluate it as you would an asset, where you're investing that money and you expect it to come back to you multifold.
Makes sense. Okay, great. Next question. Are there any tools that you would recommend to help with building a data dictionary?
I was going to joke, George, it's okay. Excel? I'm kidding. I mean, that's probably somebody's asking that question. I know we're using some new tools, but I don't want to misspeak because I don't have a full understanding of the nuances between them. But I can get back to whoever that was. I can find out what we're using. Unless, George, do you have any specific names?
No, I don't, and I hesitate too to really throw anything out there because the tool that you're going to want to use, again, everything comes back to what's that business goal, and then working backward from there. What are you trying to achieve? What is the type of team that you have available? Some tools are going to be really appropriate for much larger teams, and other tools, for smaller teams, you might want to do something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet to start with. But there are probably, even in those situations, better tools than that. It's a very powerful application, but you can oftentimes get a little bit hung up in how you use it. It depends on the nature of your team, what your goals are, But I like Cecilia's idea. Perhaps we can follow up.
I will ask.
Yeah, sounds good. I actually can't tell if we know who actually asked the question because they didn't label themselves. So whomever did ask this question, if you want to reach out directly to Cecilia or George, that would be great. Okay, moving on. Any considerations in creating an MDM that customers can benefit from machine learning or AI? From the perspective of a software as a service platform that isn't easily one size fits all. Do you guys understand that question?
I'm not sure that I do. Can we try again?
Yeah. I think the customers can benefit. I think the question is, customers can, like, when creating an MDM platform, how can AI and machine learning help when creating an MDM platform? I think that's the question.
Okay, so it's the opposite of what I was assuming it was.
I think.
George, it looks like you have some thoughts on that.
I was the same place as you. I was interpreting it the another way first, but I think that there's a lot of places where machine learning and artificial intelligence can help really across the board in our industry. One place that I think of immediately is in free text, doing sort of not quite natural language parsing, but if you have information that's coming in and you're not exactly sure what it is, you might be able to use machine learning to help you over time train on the data that you have coming in to understand where it belongs. Is what you're seeing a person or is it a business? Is it likely to be a sole proprietorship or this or that or whatever you're trying to do? You can bring data in the front end, push it through a training module, and over time refine it to figure out how you might classify it. I think the really important thing there, and Cecilia, you might have a thought here, is that particularly early on, you're going to need to do some heavy duty review and stewardship of what comes through that model to make sure that you agree with it and you're not getting really anomalous results. Otherwise, you're kind of seeding your early stage MDM efforts with things that might be substandard.
I agree. And so thinking about that question from that lens, I also think that there's potential for deep learning to be applied to quality assessment. So flagging flawed records. So a deep learning algorithm can learn what a good address looks like without using rules to say this is what a good address looks like. You can have it learn from human tagging so that it can be more progressive and it will eventually lead to less false positives.
I mean, that's a great point, Cecilia. As someone who spent a lot of time earlier in my career working on matching rules and figuring out what am I looking at here, heuristics, those rules become super limiting really fast. You can't keep up with the number of rules that you need to write to properly classify things. But the emergence of machine learning and AI algorithms allows you to really benefit almost passively in a lot of ways from what you find out and how your users react to data and things like that. So that's a really interesting perspective.
That was a good question.
Good idea.
Yeah. Okay, another question just came in. How would you suggest changing a company's culture around data, moving towards an emphasis on accuracy and its business value?
It's not going to solve everything, but the first thought that popped in my mind was you can't change what you can't measure, so start measuring it. I would just start with that and make sure that everybody sees, or everybody who needs to see it sees what the current performance is. And then once you take stock in the current state, then you can start to set goals that might that will hopefully force everybody to think differently about what's acceptable as the current data quality. So measure and track.
That's a super great point, Cecilia, measuring first, because I think a lot of places will find really interesting results from that, particularly if you've got large multifunctional organizations. You may find that this part of your company thinks that these data are working really well and are accurate and are just what they need. And this other part of your company is going to look at them and say, that's not at all what I need. And it's because they're using them for different purposes. And that kind of goes back to your point about the multifaceted golden record a little bit earlier. It might not be that it's right or wrong, but just that the perspectives from which those different parts of the organization are looking at them are perceiving them completely differently.
Yeah, good take on that.
Awesome. There's one last question, but I must admit, I'm not sure I understand it. So I will ask that the person just reach out either directly to Cecilia or George, or if you don't mind providing me with your contact info in the chat. No one in the audience will be able to see your contact info except for the presenters. So you don't have to worry about that. But if you could do that, put in your contact info, then we can reach out directly to you. The question that I'm struggling with is, can you name some roles that one might find in a master data project?
Where do we start? Let's start with the sponsor.
Sure I understand that question, unless Cecilia and George.
I think we've all worked with master data teams, so we've seen all different flavors of this. But this is my other soapbox, so I'll say you need a business sponsor. So not a CIO, not a CDO, and not even chief analytics, but a sponsor from the actual business unit that you're supporting. So that's my first pick for the team. How about you, George?
I mean, if you picked the business sponsor, then that was going to be the first one on my kickball team. I'd say that the second thing to really consider is data modeler, someone who's going to be able to look at what data you have across your organization and figure out how it all fits together. And they're going to have to talk to different parts of your organization, including your business sponsor, to understand what the utility of the data is meant to be and how it's actually used aside from what it's meant to be, and really build a model that you can start to fit all of your data into as you begin mastering it. But really the business sponsor, again, that goes back to our very first point. It's all about your business goals. Start there and work backwards, and that business sponsor is really going to be a critical part in making that happen. So Cecilia got the teammate I wanted.
No, but we're picking for the same team.
Oh, okay, then great.
So we got our sponsor. I think next I would want a project manager, right? Really strong PMP, just keep things running smoothly. And then on the more detail end of things, I would want at least one data steward or somebody to start thinking about how to start stewarding data. And that can be another hour-long conversation, but I'll just leave it there for now. Who else do we want on the team?
Let me add one more, and I don't know that it's a super defined role, but I think you need someone who's willing to be imaginative. I think you need a dreamer on the team, and that may or may not be your business sponsor.
An official title.
Yeah, data dreamer. So someone who's able to look at what you have and figure out where you're trying to go as a business and dream about what those data gaps might be, what they might mean, what they might allow. And not every idea is going to be a great one, but it at least kind of gives you a sense as you move through that project. What am I missing? What could really, pour gas on this fire to get us somewhere even further than where we imagined?
I like that. That was not on my list, but I like it.
So the question was answered, hopefully. But that actually concludes our Q&A. One point that was made in the Q&A was that this was a great presentation and they wanted me to thank you. So that actually ends things on a wonderful note. So thank you, Cecilia, and thank you, George, very much. I think some people were just making sure that we were providing a recording of this webinar, and we are. You can access the recording on the Bright Talk homepage where you actually registered for this webinar. So make sure that you check that out. I would say that this concludes our webinar for today. Really great session. Thank you, Cecilia and George, again. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out and joining us today. If you have any direct questions for our principal consultants, you can reach out to them directly, and you can access their email in the PowerPoint or recording that you can access on the Bright Talk homepage. Again, thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Nicole. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.